My next guest has been critical of the way the Port Authority handled the toll hike discussion. She says her constituents are being hit particularly hard. State Senator Diane Savino is joining me now from New York City. Senator, thanks very much for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me, Liz.
My pleasure. So the governors, and that would be Christie and Cuomo, called their plan that was approved 9-0 this morning a responsible alternative that balances the infrastructure needs of the region with toll and fare payers' economic realities. Do you agree with that?
Well, listen, certainly it's a lot better than the original plan that was proposed on August 5th by the Port Authority, which would have been about a 50% increase in the tolls that would be collected at the Port Authority bridges and tunnels, which would have an amazingly disparate impact on Staten Islanders, which, by the way, already carry 30% of the total toll revenue that the Port Authority collects. But at the end of the day, it's still not good enough for Staten Islanders. You know, Assemblyman Cusick and I, as well as some of the other legislators on Staten Island, have been pushing for a real Staten Island resident discount, similar to what the MTA gives us. And who would have ever imagined we'd be advocating for a plan that the MTA has adopted? You know you've fallen down the rabbit hole when you're complimenting the MTA in transportation
Senator,
circles.
Can I just ask you a question? I mean, you know, this is something that I think for upstaters is a little bit of an anomaly. Like, for example, I don't know of anyone who lives upstate who gets a discount when they have to cross the bridge repeatedly because they have to get from point A to point B to go to work, like the Mid-Hudson, for example, or any other of a number of bridges that we have. So why is it that Staten Islanders should get that status, in your opinion?
Because Staten Islanders are just that. They're islanders. You know, we are an island. We are connected to either the mainland of Brooklyn or to New Jersey by 4 antiquated bridges. We have no other option. So if you live upstate New York and you don't want to take that bridge, you know, you can always find an alternative way. If you live in Queens, if you live in Jersey, if you live in Brooklyn, if you don't want to pay the toll, you can always find a free transfer point. Staten Islanders can't do that. In addition, we are the least served county in the state by the MTA. We have the least transportation alternatives, the least options for buses.
Well, you have the
no
ferry, right? Isn't the ferry free?
The ferry, first of all, the ferry is a wholly owned subsidiary of New York City's Department of Transportation.
Right.
And while technically you don't pay a fee to get onto the ferry, I take the position that the ferry is only free if you can walk to it from your house and walk from it to your job.
Right.
If not, it's just an extension of your transportation. And in fact, Liz, parking at the ferry costs you $7 a day. So, you know, we have really very limited options, and as a result of it, we have very easy pockets to pick, and we're seeing that happen again with this toll increase that the Port Authority wants to impose.
Do you believe, sort of let's broaden it out a little bit here, you know, first of all, there was a lot of talk about whether there was a bait and switch going on with a lot of, oh my God, this is terrible reactions to that higher toll proposal that you mentioned that was not the one that was ultimately approved. P.S. that is still among the highest in the history of the Port Authority. Let's just make that clear. It's not low. Do you believe that Governors Christie and Cuomo actually knew what they were doing here and it was all this sort of very choreographed dance?
Look, I don't know what the governors knew or didn't know. I mean, certainly the Port Authority has been signaling to people that they were in financial distress and that they were going to have to do something about it. And I just want to say, I think both Governor Cuomo and Christie recognized that this would be a tremendous impact on the people that they represented, and they stepped forward and they said, you know what, you may need more revenue, but you don't need this much revenue, and you're not going to take it at this point in time. So for that, I'm grateful. I don't know about the political dance that went on behind the scenes. I'll let other people, you know, like yourself, you know, try and investigate that. At the end of the day, what I want for what I would like Governor Cuomo to know is that Staten Islanders are tremendously impacted by this. And even though we appreciate the reduction that's been put forward, we still think it's too much, and we need a more simple, less convoluted resident discount for Staten Islanders.
What do you
We're prepared to pay our fair share, but we shouldn't pay everybody else's fair share along with it.
What do you think the legislature can do, if anything, to try and keep a better handle about what's going on at the Port Authority? Again, and we've talked ad nauseum on this show about how the authorities are the shadow government, it's hard to keep a hold of them. The governors have called for a conditional hike, which basically hinges on a very rapid audit of the budget of the Port Authority, which the state comptroller has been quite clear is perhaps a little porous when it comes to overtime and consultants fees. But could the legislature have done a better job at keeping tabs at what's going on down there?
Well, there's a limit to what the legislature can do with respect to the Port Authority or any authority. And by the way, that's by design, to keep us out of these decision-making situations. What we can do, and I think what we will see in the next couple of days is a plethora of bills introduced by legislators looking to do something, either to restrict the Port Authority's ability to raise tolls or force them to attend public hearings, or whatever it is that, the legislator thinks should be necessary to respond to the concerns of their constituents. At the end of the day, the two governors have oversight over these agencies. The Senate has a little bit more influence over the Port Authority than the Assembly does. We have to approve, the executive director and any board members of the Port Authority. We should use that as an opportunity to, to get the Port Authority to recognize that we have concerns about the way they're operating. And then collectively, we need to turn to the person in New York State who has the ability to make the Port Authority run better, and that is the governor. And I'm sure we're all going to weigh in with him and say, we want better, we want more accountability, we want more transparency.
Do you believe that the executive director, Chris Ward, should actually leave? He is a Patterson appointee, and there's a lot of talk about whether or not he's to be held responsible here, particularly when it comes to the rebuilding at Ground Zero, which, Mayor Bloomberg and others have hailed him for.
I will tell you, I've known Chris Ward a long time. Before he went to the Port Authority, when he worked in city government, he has always struck me as the ultimate professional. I have no particular problem with Chris Ward. But I don't get to pick who's going to be the head of the Port Authority. That's up to the governor, and the governor should pick someone that he feels that he can work with. I don't think Chris Ward is responsible for this any more than any one individual is responsible for these problems. I do think, though, that the fact that the Port Authority in New York and New Jersey are saddled with the sole responsibility for rebuilding Ground Zero and absorbing the additional security costs is blatantly unfair. The federal government owes the people of this region, and certainly owes the people of the city of New York, some compensation for the amount of money we're laying out for being basically the target of our enemies around the world.
What this does, though, this whole situation with the Port Authority, which impacts people who are watching this show right now, probably minimally, unless you happen to go down to New York City quite a bit and you drive instead of taking the train, or fly if you happen to be from parts of the state that are serviced that way. Really, what it sheds a light on the fact that the transportation situation, the whole transportation policy in this state, needs a holistic makeover. You've got the MTA, which is constantly running out of money. You have upstate bridges that are falling apart, and you have the Port Authority that is running out of cash. I mean, quite clearly, it's time to do something that's more of a whole body approach, don't you think?
Absolutely. We constantly say that, transportation is the lifeblood of any economic development plan, but yet and still we shortchange it every step of the way because nobody wants to invest the money necessary to either, keep our bridges safe, to improve them, to increase our mass transit options. Nobody wants to pay for it. And we are constantly, trying to nickel and dime this system. And that's a mistake. And we're seeing now the shortfalls at the MTA, the shortfalls at the Port Authority. They are a direct result of our failure to think big. I often say that we need to have an FDR moment. We need to think big, and we need to plan for the future. Not the system we want now, but the system that this region needs in the future.
Yeah, but the problem is, of course, where the money's going to come from. It would be great if you had a WPA program, and it would put a lot of people back to work, of course, but, that just doesn't look like it's going to be happening.
Again, Liz, I'm going to go back to, in any other state in the nation, we would be looking at a tremendous infusion of federal money. I mean, for heaven's sake, they're building a bridge to nowhere in Alaska. Well, we have 3 bridges in New York that connect us to New Jersey. They all go somewhere. They need a commitment from the federal government. The Port Authority receives no tax levy money. It receives no federal money. There's something wrong with that formula. That's something that we need to examine.
I just want to ask very quickly, your Republican colleagues are starting to say that they don't see a reason why the Senate needs to come back to Albany to address a host of unfinished business, including that health care exchange bill that we didn't see pass. Do you believe that actually the Senate should come back?
Well, if there's business for the Senate to take up and there's an agreement to take it up, then we would come back. The health care exchange issue, I believe, is still under discussion. I'm not on the health care committee, so I haven't been consulted on it, but if there is some possibility that there's an agreement, I imagine we'll come back. If the Public Employees Federation, which has their contract vote still out, if they ratify it, we may have to come back to take some legislative action to implement that contract.
Right.
If we have to come back, we'll come back. Right now, it doesn't appear that there's any reason to bring us back because there's no negotiated deals. And, you know, bringing us back just for the sake of satisfying somebody else, if you're not going to accomplish anything, is really a waste of money.
True. Okay, well, Senator Savino, I want to thank you very much for being here. It is good to see you, and we may or may not see you soon, but until then, be well.
Always good to see you too, Liz. Thanks.
Thanks.